Welcome back. I thought I'd address something, and this has really gotten out of hand. This is supposed to be an engine machining channel. Really, we haven't done a whole lot of that lately, haven't we? Many of you in the audience have really expressed your displeasure at my sarcastic, non-serious, non-professional ways. Let's take this moment and mark it as my second coming. We're going to really change things up. From now on, we're going to have a more serious tone. I promise, you can fix me. I've gotten myself involved in something unhealthy. I got a chance to acquire some used metrology equipment, and this thing, it's maybe about 30 years old, but somebody else's trash is my pleasure. So let's set that to the side. I don't have enough money to pay for all this stuff, so here I am horse trading. This is an old Edelbrock air gap intake. The guy that owned all this equipment decided that this thing doesn't fit properly. Apparently I'm gonna have to lop off like 40 thousandths from the intake flanges. But in addition to that, this thing's looking a touch ratty. Now, one of the bigger issues that wouldn't exactly come to mind is that this carb flange, which is what you'd normally bolt the intake up to, it isn't exactly on the same plane as the V of the engine. Now, if you take a look at that, you can see that it's a little bit higher in the back. That can be a touch problematic, but I've got a solution. And it may come in the form of fixturing. So now the first step will be get everything nice and deburred. Somebody already mocked up a port match. There's some lines scribed out here. Unfortunately, I don't care, so we're gonna cut all those lines off. They can start over, it's fine. So, it's as simple as that. That is quite typical. I wonder what would happen if I put a straight edge across this. Whoa, check that out. Nice. I don't think I have to show you exactly how screwed up that is. It's very high right here. Yet again, so am I half the time. Now, somebody got in here and elongated these perfectly innocent bolt holes before deciding that the intake manifold needed to be cut. Be professional, Josh. Be professional. Let's try the other side. Why don't you sit flat? There you go. Stay calm. I can see the comments now. You don't know how to use that file. All right. This side was not nearly as bad. And of course, this straight edge doesn't even rock. So it looks like we've got one bank that's all screwed up, and then this one's nice and flat. So since I'm a hack that doesn't have a real machine shop, let me give you a nice in-depth look at my cylinder head fixture, which just so happens to also work with intake manifolds, but that's a story for a different day. I can feel the professionalism. Look at that. This thing's dirty. We're not gonna do it backwards today, as much as I want to. This is the CP Motorworks 24-inch head fixture. This is the bread and butter of my non-operation. We've got a nice little crossbar here. All these slots are usable holes, and I'm a real fan of that. I can actually take probably these center slots and mount the intake manifold using these bolt holes. It'll sit on here, maybe something to that effect, and then we'll be able to roll the intake over and do any surfacing. Now, typically, everything should come in pretty close. But if I have to adjust the intake manifold front to back, all I'll have to do is rotate these little bolts on the ends, and that's actually going to raise up one side or the other side of the head fixture. So let's get moved over to the milling machine, and let's see if we can make some chips for once. Oh. Nice and easy. Just the way I like it. Now I've got to set this at about a 45-degree angle, so I'm going to loosen up just these two front bolts. That one's already loose, that one's already loose. That should be pretty floppy. Let's see if I can fix something here. Why is it so tight? Urgh. Much better. So now that everything's not bound up, I'm going to loosen up this fastener, and that will loosen up the entire fine adjustment arm. We'll just eyeball 45 degrees, and that looks right about close. Perfect. Okay. I'll get this intake manifold mounted up, and then I'll go ahead and leave both of these fasteners loose. Everything will be nice and floppy here, and then I can go and get everything leveled out. So this is pretty easy. All I've got to do is get this mounted up to the carb surface. It would help to have all the correct tools on hand. Make sure there's no chips on this, make sure there's no chips on there. Pick the holes you think are pretty. Conveniently, we've got some fasteners here, and even glass bead or sandblasting grit still residing within the bolt holes. Oh yeah, that feels wonderful. That's not going to work. Frustrating. Ooh. Perhaps a little bit of lube would have helped. Go figure. You gotta tap a hole. And turns out, oh, squint your eyes. They end up filled with garbage. All right, let's try this again. Ah, much better. Okay, so we'll take these fasteners and mount the adapter to the top of the intake manifold. Nice. I like to load it one direction. I'll do front to back this time. Some blue layout dye I figure will help you guys see what's going on. Okay. Perfect. Make sure you use a washer. All right. Think that's tight enough to do machine work? See that finger action? That's years of German vehicles. Ooh. I'll get it close with the level and then we'll indicate it in, like a real machinist. Pretty flat. Okay. Ooh, don't break that glass. Come on. Pretty close. Let's try end to end. Ooh. That high spot is really screwing with me. Now I need to get the end of this bubble up to this first line here, and that should be pretty close end to end. I can live with that. Let's try the dial indicator. Now you can't see what I'm doing here, but I just put a little jack stand like this under the intake manifold to help preload it. My boy Pete that makes this fixture is cringing right now. He absolutely despises the jack stand. It's a little unnecessary, but it's going to help keep it more stable, and that's not a bad thing. So we're going to go bolt hole to bolt hole. I'm not going to go all the way to the end. A lot of times the very ends of the intake manifolds are all curled, so it's a good idea to just go pick a couple points on either side of the intake manifold and use that to get your indicated numbers off of. Moved about a thou across the middle. I think I can live with that. Okay, there's no turning back now. Whoa, it's cutting that a little close. Well, that's not the flattest thing in the world. So I'm going to drop that 2 thousandths. You can see I'm touching off here. Should cut all the way across, but it's not. So I'll go ahead and set my 0, and we'll call that 2 thousandths. Interesting. Now at some point I'm going to have to rebuild the head of my milling machine. That'll deal with some of that noise, but this is what we're up against. Focus. Come on. There you go. Do you think that would have sealed an intake gasket? Now, we're touching all the way across here and only a little bit there, so I just cranked this adjustment screw a little bit and raised it up slightly here. I've pretty much called this our starting point, so I'm going to go ahead and raise it another 2 or 3 thou. We'll get it flat. The issue that he was running into was the intake manifold was sitting a little bit too high on his cylinder heads. So to help get the ports nice and aligned, I'll cut about 45 thousandths off of both sides. That'll drop the intake manifold down, and then that'll get rid of the lip that he had because the ports on the intake manifold weren't lined up with the ports on the cylinder head. They were sitting a little bit too high, about 1/8 of an inch, so based off of how much the heads have been decked, about 45 thousandths is a good starting place. And then if I have to put it back in the machine and cut a little bit more material off the intake, that's not really a big deal. Feels pretty stable. See if I can fix that when I decide to lop off 30 all in one pass. Nice. Interesting, it didn't clean up all that corrosion after 5 thousandths off of the intake face. But we're now flat. Wonderful. Or not. Urgh. Hate it. I mean, it's not bad. 7 should clean that up, but I dare say that has something to do with the glass beading. Just wait. You just wait. I'm gonna have no chill in about a minute here. Ah, yeah, I love it. Nice. Okay, so I promised you a little bit of unhinged. You just wait. I'm preparing myself. That's pretty flat. Now, I decided to hell with the professionalism. It's just not my thing. Let's try 30 thousandths and some change. I don't think that's going to be much of an issue. Rest in peace. I say that's going just fine. Nice. All right. Let's drop that a couple thou. Let's do a finish pass. I think we'll just stop at 32. All right. And we'll see how this fits on his engine. Now, with that being the bad side, I'm really considering how screwed up this side actually was, because it seems that most of our issues had to do with one side of the brain. Pretty standard. Ah, that'll do mighty fine for just an intake gasket. I like it. So I think our number is 32 thousandths. I'm just going to play it safe here. For once in my life, I'll show a little bit of caution. Now, some of you have asked about this big old fly cutter. You can't get this anymore. This is only something you could get if you were considered one of the real ones. Let's see, let's find the cutter. It's just one big old puck. That's all it is. This one's the one that I use for aluminum. It's a PCD type insert, and that's what leaves this really nice, almost a mirror finish on the non-ferrous materials. You know, mind you, these fly cutters are 23 pounds, and I know that they get a lot heavier, and that's what gives them the energy to plow through big cuts like that without chattering, and they'll leave a really nice surface finish, enough to seal a gasket on. Now, I don't know why this is, but I've met at least 3 different people who have had some kind of incident with a giant fly cutter. I knew one guy that was reaching for something near the big old spinny tool, splits his hand in half, and then the hospital accidentally crisscrossed a couple of his tendons. So every time he made a fist, his hand would make a popping noise. Be careful of the big spinny tool. Your little fleshy parts, they don't hold up all that well. Okay, I had a little bit of a brain fart here. Now, I said I was going to show you how I was going to indicate this thing in on 45 degrees, but this is a small block Chevy. You can tell that I normally work on forwards because forward intake faces are on 45 degrees or 90 total. So usually what I'll do on a forward intake is I'll cut one side, flip the intake manifold 180 on the fixture, and then I'll actually just indicate Z on the surface that I just cut. And no matter how this side comes in at, I know that the freshly cut surface is indicated square to my cutter, so that whatever this surface ends up cutting at, I know I'm going to end up with a true 90-degree surface. Except small block Chevys are like 10 degrees off of that, so that's not a perfect right angle. I'm going to flip this 180, and I'm just going to do what I did here and indicate in off of the existing surface. At this distance, there's many thousandths in a degree. So even if I'm a couple thou off in that direction, it's really not the end of the world. The gasket should do just a fine job getting that to seal up. But yeah, brain fart. Know what you're working on, kids. I'm sure I would have figured it out eventually once I lopped off half of the intake manifold going, hey, why can't I get this thing to 90? So we're flipped over, we're going to cut the other side of this intake manifold. It is much flatter, but it's screwed up in another way. I had a hell of a time trying to get this thing squared up. It's pretty flat, but about every 2 inches, it drops a thou or so. So let's see if I can show that by doing a skim cut. I've got the intake manifold indicated in there and there. So we should see that it raises and lowers progressively across the intake manifold. Look at that. We're even touching all the way across. Almost. Nope. So much for that. It just fell away. That's frustrating. It's only touching right there. What do you think would happen if I stuck my finger in there? It was just a dream. I didn't think this would be nearly as twisted as it was. What a train wreck. This isn't what I signed up for. Okay, we're dropping down another thou, so we have lopped off about 2 thou from here. We'll make this a fairly fast pass. I'm pretty happy with how I have this indicated in. This should work just fine. So now my expectation is I'll have to lop off 7 from this side just to even get it flat. So that will likely mirror whatever happened with this side. So odd. I'm assuming this thing's left over from the 90s. I don't know anyone in the right mind that would buy an RPM air gap intake. Now it's blocked off on this, but the exhaust crossover is nice and warped on this intake manifold. So these must have been bolted onto some stock type heads that still had a exhaust crossover built into them. Sexy. Let's try 15th thou. We'll sneak up on this side. But it did clean up at 5 thousandths. I'll see you when this pass is done. Scary. Well, there we go. That's both sides resurfaced 32 thousandths. It's really kind of a basic job, but I decided we should at least do some fundamental machining here. I appreciate you staying till the end. Thanks for watching. This is Josh at Engine Rehab. I've got more coming. Trust me. It's gonna get crazy here.
Yeah.
And the valve placement.
Yeah,
You couldn't
right.
move it, you couldn't enlarge it, you couldn't do anything. So at that point, they were RPM limited, period. And even if with better camshaft technology, it wouldn't help
Uh-huh.
because they were limited by the valve.
Have you ever run into combustion chambers that when they warm up, the seats go out around? Oh, you've run into that.
Yeah.
I first heard it on the 426 Hemi when they made a Hemi on the old 413 wedge, and the bolt pattern wasn't right. And it was when it was cold, it made power and faded when they heated up. And that stud that goes down with a nut on the bottom was too close to the intake valve seat. And it shows up today in Top Fuel. You go to the pits, and when he laps in the intakes, there's a spot that don't like to clean up.
Every
So there's still a
pro
little
stock
problem
head
there.
is still like that.
Huh?
Every pro stock head is still like that. It still does that.
It still does
In
that.
the center of the combustion chamber, it'll heat up and the valves will pound it. So when it cools down, there's an open space there between the valves. But it's minuscule, it's a sliver.
Oh,
But if you re-valve job it, people will look at that and say, well, I need a valve job. No, you don't. Just take the engine to temperature and it'll seal right back up again.
oh, I see.
So we don't do valve jobs on it anymore.
Wow,
We figured out that we were actually hurting ourselves because it took a while to bring it back in.
I'll be darned.